Everybody remembers their first paycheck. Not the amount, necessarily, the feeling, that envelope, or that folded check with your own name printed on it, and the strange, grown-up weight of money that nobody gave you. For a lot of people watching this, that first job paid less per hour than a cup of coffee costs today, and it bought more than you'd think, and taught more than any of us realized at the time. Today, we're going back to the first jobs. The paper route, the soda fountain, the grocery bagging, the babysitting, the farm work, the first shift at the plant. What they actually paid, what that money bought, and why a whole generation talks about those jobs 60 years later with a fondness they never had for the careers that followed. This isn't an economics lecture. It's a walk back to being 15 with money in your pocket for the first time. Come on, let's start with the classic, the paper route. If you were a boy in this country between about 1930 and 1975, there's a decent chance you delivered newspapers. And people misremember it as a cute little job. It wasn't cute. You were up at 5 in the morning, 7 days a week, in the dark, in the rain, in the snow, folding papers with cold hands, hauling a canvas bag that weighed as much as you did, on a bike with no gears. And here's the part everyone forgets. You weren't an employee. You were essentially a small business. You bought the papers from the company and sold them to your customers, and your profit was the difference, which meant you had to collect, going door to door once a week, knocking, asking grown adults for money, and some of them didn't have it, and some of them dodged you, and if they never paid, you ate the loss. That's an 11-year-old running accounts receivable. A paper route taught more practical business in one winter than most people learn in a semester, and it taught it with cold fingers. What did it pay? Maybe a few dollars a week, sometimes more with tips, and the good routes were inherited or fought over like territory. But that money was yours, in a way an allowance never is, and every man who did it will tell you the same thing. The first thing you bought with your own paper route money is still sitting somewhere in your memory, perfectly preserved. Now the soda fountain and the drugstore counter. Working behind a soda fountain was the job. You wore the white apron and the paper hat, you learned to build a sundae, and you were in the exact social center of teenage life in town, which is why every kid wanted it. The pay was small, often something like 50 cents an hour or less, depending on the decade and the place, and yet the job had status, because you were the one behind the counter. And the skills sound quaint until you list them honestly. You handled money, you dealt with the public, you worked at speed, you kept your area clean because your boss was standing right there, and you learned to be pleasant to somebody who was being unpleasant to you. That last one is the single most valuable job skill there is, and thousands of teenagers learned it over a milkshake. Bagging groceries, same era, same idea. Small pay, maybe a bit more with the carry-out tips, and a set of lessons in how a workplace works. Show up on time, do it right, don't argue with the customer, and there's a right way to pack a bag that some old-timer will teach you and correct you on for a month. Now let's talk about the girls' jobs, because the list was shorter, and that's part of the story. Babysitting was nearly universal. The rate was famously low, often something like a quarter or 50 cents an hour, sometimes less for younger sitters, and you were often responsible for 3 or 4 children for an entire evening at age 13. Think about that arrangement now. It would give a modern parent a heart attack. And it worked, mostly, because the whole neighborhood was watching, and because girls were trained from about age 8 to run a household anyway. There was also waitressing, the 5 and dime counter, the switchboard, secretarial work for the older ones, and behind all of it, a ceiling everybody could see. The options were narrower, the pay for the same work was lower, and the assumption underneath was that this was temporary until marriage. Let's not skip past that. The girls of that generation worked just as hard, learned just as much, and were paid less and offered less on purpose. It's part of the honest story of first jobs, and it took decades of women pushing to change it. And out in the country, the first job wasn't a job, it was just life. Farm kids worked from the age they could carry a bucket, and it wasn't paid at all, because it was the family's operation. But there was also work for hire, detasseling corn, picking fruit and berries, hauling hay in summer for a neighbor, brutal, hot, dusty work that paid by the hour or by the bale. And that's where a lot of rural teenagers got their first real cash. Ask a farm kid about their first paying job, and they'll describe a hayfield in July, and then, curiously, smile about it. And then, for a huge number of young men, the first real job was the plant. You graduated on Friday and started at the factory on Monday. Or you didn't graduate and you started earlier. And this is the part that's hard to explain to young people now. That job was enough. Not enough to be rich, enough. It came with a wage a young man could rent on, then marry on, then buy a small house on, and often it came with a pension nobody thought was remarkable at the time. You walked in the door at 18 with no degree and no connections, and the arrangement was, work hard, stay, and you'll be all right. That's the piece people are really talking about when they talk about the old days, not the price of bread, the existence of a door that a regular 18-year-old could walk through into a whole stable life. Let me add a few more first jobs to the list, because every one of these built somebody. The Shoeshine box. A kid with a homemade box, a couple of brushes and a tin of polish could set up on a corner or work a hotel lobby. And that was a business with essentially no startup cost. It paid in coins, and it taught negotiation, hustle, and how to talk to grown men. And a surprising number of successful people in this country will tell you their first income came out of a Shoeshine box. Caddying at the golf course, which was its own institution. Long, hot walks, carrying somebody else's bag for a fee and a tip, and an education in reading people that money can't buy. A lot of boys got their first look at a completely different social class from inside that job, and it changed what they thought was possible for themselves, sometimes for the better, sometimes with a chip on the shoulder that lasted decades. Setting pins in a bowling alley before the machines. Yes, that was a job. A kid sat above the lanes and reset pins by hand, ducking flying wood all night, and got paid by the game. When automatic pinsetters came in, that job vanished overnight, one of the first clear cases in most people's memory of a machine simply erasing a whole category of teenage work. It wouldn't be the last. Sweeping up at the barbershop, stocking shelves, running deliveries on a bicycle for the drugstore or the butcher, working the concession stand at the ballpark or the drive-in, ushering at the movie theater with a flashlight, which came with the best perk in the world. You saw every movie for free, in pieces, from the back. And the summer institutions, lifeguarding, camp counselor, working at a resort or a lake town for the season. Those weren't just jobs. Those were how a lot of people met their spouse, and how a lot of teenagers spent their first months living away from home, which does more growing up than a year of school. Now here's a detail about those jobs that's almost impossible to imagine now. Most of them were found by walking in the door and asking. No application portal, no resume, no interview process, no background check. You went in, you asked the man behind the counter if he needed anybody, and either he did or he didn't. And if he did, you might be working that afternoon. A neighbor's word was the entire hiring system, and being known as a good kid from a good family was your qualification. That system was efficient, human, and, let's be honest about this too, deeply unfair to anybody outside the circle. If you weren't known, or your family wasn't liked, or you were the wrong color for the neighborhood, the same informal system that got the grocer's nephew hired kept you out with no explanation. It's the same coin. Personal networks are wonderful when you're inside them, and invisible walls when you're not. So what did that first paycheck buy? Small things, and they mattered enormously. Movie tickets and burgers for a week, records, a used bike, a fishing rod, a bat and glove, school clothes, and for a lot of families, that wasn't discretionary. The kids' earnings went into the household or bought their own shoes and books, and nobody thought that was unfair. And the big one, for a certain kind of teenager, the car. The used car of your own, bought with a summer's wages, was the great American teenage economic achievement, and it explains why so many men can tell you the exact price of a car they bought in 1962 and cannot tell you what they had for breakfast. And here's something worth saying honestly, because it's the whole difference. For a lot of those kids, summer work could cover a serious chunk of a year of state college. That arithmetic, a summer job paying for a big slice of tuition, was real, and it stopped being real. And that's one of the biggest quiet changes in the whole story of American money. Now let me be honest about the other side, because I always do. Those jobs were often genuinely hard and sometimes unsafe. Kids worked around machinery, in fields with chemicals, on ladders, in heat, with none of the protections that came later, and some of them got hurt, and a few were hurt badly. The nostalgia glosses over the injuries. Not everyone had a choice either. For plenty of kids, that first job wasn't about earning car money, it was because the family needed it, and school lost. Boys left school for the plant, girls left school to work or to raise siblings, and some of those people spent their whole lives knowing exactly what that cost them. And the wages, adjusted honestly, were low, very low. If we're going to admire the era, we can't only count what the money bought and skip what the hour paid. Plenty of that work was underpaid by any standard, and much of it was worse if you were black, or a woman, or a migrant worker in a field, where first job could mean something a lot harder than a paper route, for pay that wasn't fair by any measure of any decade. So what's the honest sum of all of it? The money was small, the lessons were enormous. And the world those jobs opened onto was, in one specific way, more generous than the one we have now. A teenager could earn real independence with unskilled labor, and an 18-year-old could find a door into a stable life without a degree. That's not nostalgia, that's arithmetic. And it's the piece that people who lived it are trying to describe when they say things were different, even when they can't put it in numbers. But here's what hasn't changed, and it's the part worth handing forward. The value of that first job was never really the wage. It was showing up when you didn't feel like it. It was somebody who wasn't your parent telling you that wasn't good enough, do it again. It was the first time you understood that money is hours of your life converted into something you can hold. Every kid who ever got that lesson carried it for 50 years, and it's available at any wage, in any decade, including this one. Now here's the part I've been waiting for all video, and I want everybody in the comments for this one. What was your first job? How old were you? What year was it? And what did it pay? The actual number, if you remember it. What did you buy with that first paycheck? And what's the one thing that job taught you that stuck for life? Put it all down below, with the town and the year. I read every single one, and I'll tell you honestly, this comment section is going to be a better history of this country than anything I could write. Until next time, take care of yourselves.